Charlie. Nice to see you again.
Yes, great to be with you again.
So, we're talking about the September Visa Bulletin that just came out, and we didn't really see much movement, which we're going to talk about. But maybe let's start with family base, and you can help us understand what's going on with family based.
Yeah, for family based, we haven't had any movement in the all chargeability areas since July. So for August and September, the dates have been held, which is a little bit surprising to me. And last fiscal year, they did the same thing for August of and September of fiscal 2024. All of the family dates were held, and they ended up the year slightly more than 10,000 under the family sponsored limit. They're following that same pattern this year, holding the dates for August and September. And I would have serious questions about having held the dates if they're more than probably 5 to 7,000 under the family limit. That would be upsetting to me that they did not advance either the August or September dates in an effort to maximize family number use.
Okay, remind us again what happens if they don't use all the family numbers.
If they don't use the family numbers, any unused family fall across to the next year's employment limits. So in fiscal 24, they were approximately 10,000 under the family sponsored limit. So those 10,000 were then added to the fiscal 2025 employment limit, raising it from the 140,000 minimum to 150,000. So it was
So,
beneficial. It was detrimental to the applicants waiting in the family sponsored categories, which has tremendous backlogs and waiting lists in each and every category. But it was very beneficial to those waiting in the employment visa categories because it allowed more employment applicants to be processed during the current fiscal year.
okay. Well, we'll have to see what happens, when the fresh new year starts in October. But let's talk about employment base. So, if we look at employment base, all chargeability countries, it's still current for EB1. That's great. EB2, it's the same, holding steady since August, where it actually went backwards. And then for EB3, we see that the dates are still staying the same as July of 2025. So, any comments on this?
No, actually, it kind of parallels to what I had mentioned in probably back in June and July that I thought that the rapid movement of the many of the employment dates might require corrective action or dates to be held later in the summer, and that's pretty much what's happening at this point.
Okay, so let's go back to your analogy that you always provide when we talk about budgeting and how the Department of State basically budgets the visa numbers or the visa issuances per month. So the new fiscal year starts in October of each year. And so let's just use this year as a sample because this is the end. September 30th will be the end. So basically, in October, November, December, I have my budget of $1,000. I'm sticking to my budget. I'm spending $1,000 or maybe a little bit less, right?
Right.
And then comes the months January, March, April, and June, and I have some excess cash. So I'm spending my money and I'm spending more actually than I've been allotted, right?
Right.
So I start spending more than I really think I should, thinking that I'll just make it up later in the coming months, right? So there's this cruise or something I want to go to. So I'm basically taking the money from the following months to be able to use it, thinking that for the entire year, I'll still have enough money. Then we get to August and we find out I've depleted all my funds. Not only do I not have the $1,000 that I have budgeted for August, I already used it up and I'm already at a deficit. And then in September, the $1,000 that I have there still doesn't compensate for the fact that I've spent more than my budget allowed. So at the end of the year, what ends up happening is I don't have any more budget. Is that correct?
That's perfect. Perfect
Okay.
description.
All right. So we're trying to really help you understand how, because we get a lot of questions like, how come Department of State doesn't know exactly how many numbers to use? And when we see the number use and where they've gone over, they've gone under. And if you think about it in this practical sense of this is the money that I've been budgeted each month, and then you spend a little bit more than you're supposed to, thinking that you can make up for it at the end of the year. And then by the time the end of the year comes, you're out of money,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's where we're sitting in the month of September, where we see no movement. There basically was zero movement in the Visa Bulletin, right, Charlie?
Right. Yeah, and I think your analogy of the cruise, you decided you had extra money so you could splurge on the cruise, and you thought the cruise was gonna cost you X, but when you were on the cruise, you actually spent more for the excursions and shopping and everything than you really expected. So you're originally, you were originally spending what you thought was 1,200, $1,500, but you went, $2,500 or whatever.
Way
Yeah,
over that September can't even compensate for the
yeah.
amount of money I spent in August and the prior months, because I went a little, I went over budget January, March, April, and June, and this is where you find yourself. So hopefully that analogy can help, our listeners understand why the, visa bulletin and the dates fluctuate so much. And it is also based on demand, right? So demand from Department of State and demand from USCIS. We don't really know the number use, the full number use, unless they publish the data. And I think they published 2024 data. Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah, about a month ago, they finally published the fiscal 24 data. And another thing is the State Department, in consultation with the USCIS, makes the determination of the dates. So the Immigration Service is telling state what they believe number use at USCIS offices for adjustment of status cases will be based on the date movements decided upon. But if the USCIS projections are much lower than the actual amount of numbers used, that can cause a problem as we see.
Yeah. So there's no movement in September. And if we go to China, again, no movement as well. So any comments here, Charlie?
Now, again, as I mentioned earlier in the year, I thought that the movements in the January through April, followed by the June and July movements, I thought those could have been more controlled at a slower pace and still achieve the same result of maximizing number use without numbers going unavailable in the month of August and or September.
Yeah, and then we're gonna have our chatting with Charlie next month, and then a webinar also at the end of the month where we go more into detail. But if you're just looking at this for EB2 for the entire fiscal year, the dates moved a maximum of 9 months. The next slide is India, and then wow, we haven't seen movement in EB2 since April of 2025, so it's staying the same. Also for EB1, April 2025 was the last time it moved. EB3 jumped a little bit to May in August of 2025, but again, no movement in September. So any comments here, Charlie?
Some of the reason behind the lack of movement in the India EB2 category could be people that were in EB3 and have upgraded. As you can see, these dates, people have been waiting around a long time in the third preference category. And during that time, they gain the expertise to be eligible for second preference. So they upgrade their case, and that may take some time. And suddenly it comes through and uses a second preference number instead of the original third that they filed in. In many earlier years, the India second preference category benefited from the unused rest of world second preference numbers that fell across and allowed often several thousand additional numbers to be provided for India's second preference number use. That fall across of unused numbers has been completely eliminated ever since the rest of world second preference category became oversubscribed and has a final action date. Therefore, the India second preference and third are subject strictly to their per country limit, which is approximately 3,000 this year for second preference and third preference, which is far fewer numbers than they had been having in earlier years.
Yeah, so I think that's why we're not seeing any more movement. There's no extra unused numbers to be able to, flow into India.
To the items in the Visa Bulletin indicates that employment numbers may run out during the month of August or September, and that they would have to make categories immediately unavailable. So when we meet this time next month, we can say if any of that has happened. But I would expect many of the employment limits to be reached in August or September, and the State Department potentially to make an announcement that no more numbers are available. That will not impact applicants who have been scheduled by the National Visa Center for appointments at overseas posts, because when the State Department announced for example, the September dates and the National Visa Center scheduled appointments, the State Department would have allocated a block of numbers to each of the overseas posts for use by the applicants, which the National Visa Center is scheduling. So even if they were to later announce that, okay, the India second preference or the India third preference limit has been reached, if I was an Indian third preference applicant overseas, I could appear for my interview and they should have a number for me, even though the limit has been reached. But if I was processing in the US, that would be an entirely different story.
And so remember in the beginning of the CWC, you mentioned that, in 2024, there were unused numbers, so it went to employment-based. Do they do that, intentionally to increase the employment-based numbers, or, like,
They
what
should
normally
not. No,
happens?
but it is a question I've heard asked, because again, there are the waiting list in the family sponsored categories are even worse than those in the employment categories. Employment may think that, things are bad, but in many of the family sponsored categories, people can easily have a 15 to 20-year wait. So there are plenty of numbers. So in theory, there should be minimal amount of unused, if any, family numbers on a annual basis. Things come up. There can be unintended consequences. I believe it was in 2019, demand was low, so I made the family 2A category current in July in an attempt to maximize number use. And even though the category was current, we didn't have enough applicant demand. So in that year, the limit was not reached. But in most years, when I was in charge from 2007 through approximately 2019, typically we were within 2% of the annual limits. So about within 2% of the combined family and employment limit. And that is the goal. So the State Department's goal is to maximize number use. But again, I have heard attorneys ask me, are they holding back movement of the family to benefit employment categories?
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to wait and see, right? So we'll wait and see, and we'll see how the October Visa Bulletin plays out. But thank you, Charlie, for joining us on discussing the September Visa Bulletin. Again, it's the end of the government's fiscal year, September 30th, and the next Visa Bulletin that will come out will be for October. So we look forward to chatting with you next month.
All right, everybody, take care.
Thank you, Charlie.